Pulse diagnosis is so deep and profound. It can give you amazing results, and it can also be really, really confusing. So in this video, I'd like to break down how you can really simplify your pulse diagnosis, and also how you can use your posture to maybe be a little bit more specific with your pulse diagnosis and get better diagnostic readings. So without further ado, let's get started. If you're new to this channel, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that little bell to be notified whenever we give out new videos. And if you're returning to this channel, thank you so much for coming back and learning with me. It is a true pleasure and an honor that you respect me with your time, energy, and effort. So let's get started. So one of the biggest things that I've noticed when people are taking pulse in TCM schools here in the United States, or those who have been trained outside of the United States as well, is that when they're taking the pulse, they tend to have really poor posture. Now, I'm going to give you some examples of this here in a second, but just to explain why that I'm looking at the pulse, and before I get into why I'm looking at the posture, but before I get into that, I'm going to give a bit of a disclaimer here. I am not saying that anybody's pulse reading is incorrect. I'm not saying that this is the only way to take the pulse. I'm just saying it's the way that I was taught how to take the pulse in Japan, how most Japanese acupuncturists take the pulse, and I feel that most of the students that I teach it to who start to utilize this method tend to say that it makes it easier to really understand and feel the pulse. So my challenge to you is to try it out and see if it works. Usually what I tell my patients and my students is same, better, different, or worse. And go from there. So measurable results is always what you want, and more accurate results, of course. So let's go into the few fine details and really understand the differences. So one of the biggest things that I really want you to focus on when you're taking your pulse or doing anything in your treatment is definitely your posture. So posture is huge in Japanese acupuncture, and really Japanese society and any traditional martial art, yoga, anything, right? Posture is really huge. And when you have poor posture when you're taking the pulse, what that can do is lead to really poor results, because you're no longer being a good conduit of ki, and your body is also tense from holding poor posture. It's hard for your body to be actually in a poor posture for a long period of time, or even a short one, especially if it's a really, really awkward posture. So what does poor posture look like, and what does good posture look like? Let's check it out in these videos. Okay, so some of the common ways that I see people taking their posture when they're doing their pulse diagnosis is almost always I see people standing to the side and holding with one hand like this. And it would be great if you're just doing one pulse, that's fine. But I think if you put your body on a slight angle, so that way your dantian is facing what you're doing rather than having it face over here, it's going to be easier because all your strength is coming from your dantian. So if you have 2 feet on the ground and you're just doing one at a time, I think this is a great way to take the pulse. But what I often see from people is doing something like this. They're like over here, or they're kind of like over here, or they have like 1 foot up, or they're just kind of like in these odd positions the whole time. And then when I see people trying to take 2 hands at once, so they don't even put the hands here. They're like up here, or the hands are like all the way down here. And the practitioner, you can see like I automatically get into this position with my legs where there's one in front and one in back. But most of the time what I see people doing is they're kind of like this, or they're kind of over here. They're just in a really bad body posture. So how you should look when you're taking the pulse. Usually you want to have 1 foot in front and 1 foot behind. You want to have your hip at the same height as your patient's hip. So my patient's hip's right here. I want to be about right here. And then I'm going to put both of his hands right over his belly button. And you want to have that pulse kind of facing outwards. So do you see how I'm not putting the hands flat on the stomach, but kind of having them come out? Now, I have seen some practitioners do it this way where their hands are flat on their stomach. I recommend doing it this way, and I kind of stack their hands just so it's easier for them to do it, and then take the pulse. Now, let's go into how to like actually take the pulse and not just squeeze the pulse, because this is a huge pet peeve of mine. Most of the time people, when they take the pulse, they just squeeze. And this is really uncomfortable to the patient, so I'm just squeezing with my hand. Instead, you're going to want to have the same amount of pressure on both hands, and you're going to find the very top of the pulse. And then I'm going to rock down with my whole body, find the very bottom of that radial pulse, and then I'm going to come up and find the middle of the pulse. And then I'm going to do that twice. So I find the top, bottom, middle, top, bottom, middle. And so the middle is the pulse reading that you really want to take. The other two are just trying to find the very top and very bottom of that radial pulse to see where the pulse is floating in there. If you're short like me, another thing that can really happen to you is that you go to take the pulse, but let's say you're not treating at your bed, you're at the patient's house or something, and they're not at the level of your dantian. Your patient, by the way, should always be at the level of your dantian. So one of the things you can do is, if you can't spread your legs like this, what you can do is put your hip to their hip, of course with permission to sit next to them. And then you kind of rock and sit next to them like this, and this gives you a nice position to take the pulses. Now, even if you take only one pulse at a time, I find that this is a really comfortable way to do it. So you can take both pulses at once and not even change positions. Here, again, we're always going to be taking the top, bottom, and then finding that middle of the pulse. Now, there's a bunch of different ways on how you can hold your hands. You can use your thumb as a fulcrum. Some practitioners don't. That's really a personal preference. It's very interesting that you can go and you can still take the pulse with one hand, or you can go and take the pulse with two hands. Really, that's a personal decision, and that's how your brain works, you know. But the most important thing here is really understanding the differences in how your posture can really affect your treatment. And so I really do want to say that that is like the number one thing. If I have you change anything about your pulse taking, change your posture. It's really important. So always 2 feet directly connected to the earth, a nice relaxed shoulder. Remember, we always want upper deficiency and lower excess. Strong key in the lower jiao and relaxed in the upper. Middle jiao should always be strong, but that's a different subject. So I hope that was a really informative video for you, and it helped you to understand how little teeny things can really affect how your pulse can change, and how your pulse reading, well, not your pulse, how your pulse reading and diagnostics can really change. And I'm going to leave you with one specific thought, and that is, you know, the pulse is an amazing tool that we have to diagnose the patient and really check in on what we're doing. And so I highly encourage you to take the pulse at both the beginning and the end of the treatment in the same position that you took it in the beginning as well as the end. Always, like if they're laying down, take it laying down. And then, you know, if you want, you can also check it in between. The pulse is just an amazing way for you to assist your treatment and really work on everything that you're doing. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that little bell. I'd love to hear your comments and feedback after you tried this, if it changed your diagnostic techniques, if it changed the results of those diagnostics, and also how it felt in your body. So until I see you next time, happy practicing.